What if I told you that the woman who taught the entire world how to fall in love never truly experienced it herself? That the greatest romantic writer in history died alone? And that the books the whole world now calls masterpieces were almost burned? This is her story. December 16th, 1775. A cold winter night in the small village of Steventon, England. Inside a modest country home, a baby girl is born. Her father, Reverend George Austen, holds her in his arms and smiles. He has no idea at all, that this tiny, quiet baby girl will one day shake the entire world of literature to its core. They name her Jane Austen. Now let me paint you a picture of the world Jane was born into, because it matters deeply. This was 18th century England. A time when women were not allowed to own property. A time when a woman's only purpose, according to society, was to marry well, stay quiet, and look pretty. Women did not write books. Women did not have opinions. Women did not dare to challenge the men around them. But Jane Austen? She didn't get the memo. From the very beginning, Jane was different. While other girls her age were learning to sew and curtsy, Jane was reading. Obsessively reading. Her father had one of the largest private libraries in the entire county, over 500 books. And Jane devoured every single one of them. She wasn't just reading for fun. She was studying, analyzing, questioning. By the age of 11 years old, Jane was already writing her own stories. Short pieces, comedy sketches, parodies of the popular novels of the day. But here's what made her special, even then. She was funny. Not just clever. Not just smart. She was wickedly, brilliantly funny. Her early writings were full of sarcasm, satire, and a razor-sharp understanding of human nature that most adults never develop. At 12 years old, she was mocking the melodrama of popular romance novels with a level of wit that would make modern comedy writers jealous. Her family loved it. They would gather around after dinner, and Jane would read her latest pieces aloud, and everyone would laugh. But outside those four walls, the world had no idea she existed. And it wouldn't. For a very long time. Jane was 20 years old when she met him. Tom Lefroy, a young Irish law student. Smart, charming, handsome. The kind of man who walks into a room and makes everyone look up. And Jane, quiet, observant, brilliant Jane, looked up too. They danced together at local balls. They talked for hours. They laughed at the same things, challenged each other's ideas, and felt something that Jane had never felt before in her carefully controlled, book-filled life. Something real. Something terrifying, love. But here's where the story turns dark. Tom Lefroy had no money. Jane's family had no money. And in 1795 England, when two people with no money fell in love, society stepped in and crushed it. Tom's family pulled him away, sent him back to Ireland. And just like that, the man Jane Austen may have loved more than anyone else in her entire life was gone. She wrote about it, but only in letters. Private, painful letters to her sister Cassandra. She joked in one of them about how scandalously much they had danced together, but underneath that joke, she was devastated. And what does a devastated genius do? She writes, over the next few years, Jane channeled every heartbreak, every frustration, every brilliant observation into her writing. She began working on a novel she called First Impressions. A story about a witty, intelligent young woman named Elizabeth Bennet and a proud, infuriating man named Mr. Darcy. A story about misunderstanding, pride, prejudice, and eventually, love. Sound familiar? That manuscript would one day become Pride and Prejudice, one of the most beloved novels ever written in the English language. But here's the part nobody talks about. Jane's father believed in her so deeply that in 1797, when Jane was just 21 years old, he took that manuscript and sent it to a London publisher himself. He wrote a letter. He explained the book. He even offered to pay some of the publishing costs. The publisher's response? They sent the manuscript back without even opening it. The reply from Cadell and Davies was just 3 words: declined by return. No feedback. No explanation. No encouragement. Just no. Jane was 21 years old, had written what would become one of the greatest novels in history, and the world looked at her and said, "You don't matter." Most people would have quit. Jane Austen kept writing. In 1802, Jane received a marriage proposal from a man named Harris Big Wither. He was heir to a large estate. Marrying him would mean financial security, not just for Jane, but for her entire family. Jane said yes. She accepted the proposal on a Thursday evening. And then she changed her mind the very next morning. She walked up to Harris, looked him in the eyes, and said no. She turned down financial security. She turned down social status. She turned down the one thing her entire society told her she was supposed to want. Because she could not bring herself to live a lie. Because she had written too much about real love to pretend she felt something she didn't. And in that single moment, this quiet woman from a small English village made a decision that changed literary history. She chose her truth over comfort. She chose her pen over a ring. And she went home and she wrote, "Here is something that will absolutely break your heart." Jane Austen wrote in secret. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had to. The desk she wrote at had a creaky door hinge, and she deliberately never oiled it. Because when visitors came, the sound of that creak gave her just enough time to hide her writing papers beneath a book or a piece of needlework. Think about that for a moment. One of the greatest writers in human history, hiding her work like it was something dangerous. Because in a very real sense, it was. A woman who wrote books, who had opinions, who observed and recorded and satirized society. That woman was threatening. Unsettling, strange, so Jane hid. She wrote between chores and social calls. She wrote in stolen moments. She wrote in a house full of people who had no idea what was happening on those small secret pages. And somehow, from those hidden scraps of paper, masterpieces were born. In 1811, after years of rejection and silence, Jane Austen finally got her first novel published. Sense and Sensibility. And the title page didn't say Jane Austen. It said by a lady, no name. Just a lady. Because even in publication, a woman wasn't allowed to fully exist. But something extraordinary happened. People read it, and they loved it. The first edition sold out completely. Within months, Sense and Sensibility was the talk of London drawing rooms, country houses, and royal courts alike. And Jane, sitting quietly in her countryside home, her name unknown to the public, her identity a secret, felt something shift. The world was finally reading her words, even if they didn't know they were hers. 2 years later, in 1813, Pride and Prejudice was published. The same manuscript that had been returned unopened 16 years earlier. The same story of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy that Jane had written as a broken-hearted 21-year-old. The reaction was explosive. Readers were obsessed. They couldn't put it down. They fell in love with Darcy and Lizzie just as fiercely as if they were real people. Even the Prince Regent of England, the future King George IV, was a devoted fan who kept a set of Jane's novels in every one of his royal residences. And Jane, still anonymous, still unknown, still, to the world, just a lady. By 1816, Jane was 40 years old and she was sick. She didn't know exactly what was wrong. Modern doctors believe she had Addison's disease, a condition affecting the adrenal glands. Her body was failing her. But her mind? Her mind was still blazing. Even as her health deteriorated, even as she struggled to hold a pen, even as walking became difficult, Jane kept writing. She was working on a novel called Sanditon. And even in her sickness, even in her pain, the writing was alive, energetic, funny. She refused to let her body silence what her mind was still screaming. But by the spring of 1817, even Jane Austen couldn't fight anymore. On July 18, 1817, at the age of 41 years old, Jane Austen died. She died with 2 unpublished manuscripts on her desk. She died without ever seeing her name on a book cover. She died without ever knowing, could never have imagined, what was coming next. After Jane died, her brother Henry finally revealed the truth. By a lady the author everyone had been reading and loving for years was Jane Austen, a clergyman's daughter from a small village in Hampshire. And slowly, steadily, unstoppably, the world began to realize what it had. Pride and Prejudice was translated into dozens of languages. Film adaptations were made. Stage productions. Television series. New generations discovered Elizabeth Bennet and fell in love all over again. Scholars began analyzing Jane's work with the same reverence reserved for Shakespeare. Universities built entire courses around her 6 novels. Today, Jane Austen's face is on the British 10-pound note. Today, over 20 million copies of Pride and Prejudice alone have been sold worldwide. Today, a tiny cottage in Chawton, England, where Jane lived and wrote in her final years, receives thousands of visitors every year from every corner of the planet. All of them coming to stand in the same rooms where those secret, hidden, creaking door pages were written. The woman who was told she didn't matter now defines English literature. The manuscript that was returned unopened is now studied in every major university on earth. The woman whose name couldn't appear on her own books now has her face on the nation's currency. People say, Jane Austen wrote about love. And yes, she did. But she wrote about something deeper than romance. She wrote about dignity. About the quiet, fierce, unbreakable dignity of a person who refuses to pretend to be less than they are. Elizabeth Bennet doesn't chase Mr. Darcy. She challenges him. She holds her ground. She insists, in a world that tells her she has no right to insist on anything, that she deserves to be respected. That wasn't just fiction. That was Jane. Every time society told her to be quiet, she picked up her pen. Every time the world rejected her, she kept going. Every time she was underestimated, she wrote something more brilliant than anything the people underestimating her could have imagined. She never got the great love story she deserved. She never got the recognition she earned in her lifetime. She never even got her own name on her own books. And yet, 200 years after her death, when a person anywhere in the world opens Pride and Prejudice for the first time and reads that very first line, they feel something. Something warm. Something sharp. Something human. That feeling? That is Jane Austen. Still here. Still speaking. Still, after everything, winning. She was rejected. She was ignored. She was hidden away by a world that wasn't ready for her. But she never stopped writing. And that is why, 2 centuries later, we are still talking about her. The next time the world tells you that you are too much or not enough, remember Jane Austen. Pick up your pen. And write anyway.